So they each have different paintings in here. There's a lot of artists in this show, about half contemporary and half historic. And so the purpose of the show is, A, I like psychedelic art. B, I've always wanted to have a show here in town. And so it just seems like all of a sudden a lot of contemporary artists have been having sort of a nod and a look back to psychedelia, or having psychedelic sort of influences in their work. And so that was sort of interesting. So we're presenting the contemporary artist and contextualizing the work and with a backdrop of historic work from the 60s. Most of it op art, because that's an area we specialize in quite a bit, but also a lot of figurative work and from like Tom Green and a few other artists in the show. And also original posters and handbills from the Fillmore from the Fillmore West and Avalon Ballroom and a few other places from around the Bay Area that also kind of bridges the context. Psychedelic art was influenced by a lot of different things. Surrealism, the cartooning from the 1930s, Art Nouveau, op art, pop art. So there are a raft of influences, and also Indian batik printing on like textiles. So there were a lot of references, which seems odd because the confluence of those, but each artist sort of took one of those, it seems like, and went in a particular direction, but there was always an infusion of things, especially if you look at these posters and handbills. You'll see lots of an Art Nouveau influence in many of them, especially the way the lettering sort of flowed and created words, but yet they created an image first and foremost. So, and they also, many of them were figurative and had a narrative about them. Most of them very trippy, so it wasn't really clear what the narrative was, but it was very interesting. And so we actually have a number of younger artists who have kind of gone in that direction, it seems like, with their figurative work. I'm looking at Andrew Chimelli's right now, which you guys can't see in the audience, and then also Katie Kennedy and a few other people. We also have Vadim Stepanov's work in the other space, and his is very surreal, very figurative. And but again, you know, there's just were lots of influences. So that's what I thought was fascinating when I saw all these young people and more contemporary artists working in this realm again, and that was the whole point of the show. So what I'd like to do today then is let each of these artists talk a bit about their work. Behind us is, I don't know if people can see it or not, but is Heather McGill's work. And we'll move the camera around, I guess, and show you Jennifer's and Danny's. But they kind of are three different types of work. And so what I'd like to do is kind of start with, and I'm going to start with you, Heather, because when we were talking about this, she confessed that she was really into psychedelia and like psychedelic work, and this was an area of passion for her too. So anyway, but we've never really been able to sit down and talk much about it. I know we've been sort of corresponding back and forth. Heather lives in Detroit most of the time and is moving here to Santa Fe at the end of this school term. Anyway, why don't you kind of start talking about sort of your background in terms of this regard, what it is you like and how your work sort of references that.
Okay, let's see. I think can they see the work?
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
You mentioned a few aspects of psychedelia. One is textile or the printed fabric, which is very much part of my work, using textile design, and mostly the everyday textile. And so I've always seen that as a thread that runs through both of those, and you'll see quite a bit of it in both these pieces. If you look closely, I use everyday textiles as stencils, so I actually spray through. I was trained as a customizer. I can paint urethane lacquer, motorcycle tanks, cars. That's where I started. During art school, I did that part-time. And so just customized automobiles and the use of color and acid color and candy color, and all of that is part of psychedelia. And so it's also part of my work. I'm very interested in pushing pattern as far as I can until it almost you can't escape it until it's almost a revulsion. And so I use what I call hyper patterning in all of my work. Both of these I would consider, especially this one, using hyper patterning. Another device that I use that I think psychedelia uses is the telescoping of space, where you have a kind of concentric or a telescoping to a center point. And you can see that in posters like this and some of the other posters in the exhibition. And I have it used twice in this piece, which is ocular, and in this piece in areas like this, where you're focusing in on a section of pattern. It isn't as if the information is different in that area, but it's brought into focus through the use of the plastic. So all of the parts, everything is hand-sprayed paper, and then it's laser-cut plastic. Living in Detroit, I have access to technology, manufacturing technology, so I use the laser daily to cut all my plastic and paper parts, and spent 20 years of my life there touching on the manufacturing in Detroit and learning a lot of different building skills and ways of making things because of living in that city and accessing the people that live there.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned about the patterning, because Catherine Davis was here last night. She's lives here, art historian and critic, and she hosts a radio talk show on art. But anyway, one thing that struck her when she looked at yours was pattern and design.
Right.
And so, which also kind of emerged a little past the prime of psychedelia. But I don't know what your thoughts are on the pattern and design movement. And
I love it.
Well, yeah, and it ties in very well with your work.
Right.
Do you know Marion Estes, by chance?
Yes, yeah.
Well, it's interesting because Marion comes out of pattern and design.
Yeah.
But also her work is very trippy. It's very psychedelic when you look at her work. But she's imbued it with a lot of content. Most of hers is environmental activism, when you look at it very closely. But she operates through collage, largely paper collage, combined with painting, but also fabric and textile collaging. You know, not sewing per se like you do.
Right.
Like yours.
These are all sewed, completely sewed together. I use no other form of connection, like a bolt or glue. I never use glue. So everything is sewn to create structure.
And they're on linen backgrounds, on a linen ground, correct?
Some of them are. I think this one's on plastic, actually. It's just sewn through onto a plastic backing plate. Yeah. And then some are on linen, stretched linen. So.
Very nice. It's funny because we can segue one of two ways. Danny has a sort of a motorcycle influence in his work as well. And then Jennifer's work also deals a lot with sort of patterning and repetition and in that sort of process as well. But I guess we need to stay in order. And so Danny, how am I going to do this? Should we go grab one of Danny's paintings?
I'm just going to grab Medusa.
Oh,
Is that
okay.
okay?
Yeah, sure. Put it right in front of you. But Danny, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and kind of talk a little bit more about your work as well.
All right.
And your background and sort of influences.
Okay. Hello, folks. Thanks for coming out today. My name's Daniel McCoy Jr. Originally from Oklahoma, but I've lived out here off and on in the Southwest for about going on 25 years now. To understand my artwork, you kind of have to understand who my parents were, and my mother's still alive. But my mom is a Creek and Potawatomi and Seminole Indian from Oklahoma, and my father was ex-Hells Angel from the Bay Area. He was released from service from the Air Force, serving time in Vietnam. And he was released winter of '65, and so he stayed from '65 until about '71 in the Bay Area. And so he fled California and met my mother in Tulsa. And so we had all this great influence from the Bay Area. I had the most excellent record collection that they had given up on. We don't act like that anymore. Listen to this, we're back to the earth. But when I was a young teenager, I discovered these records. And and I was living in at Oklahoma at the time. Was very conservative in the mid '80s, and I just would hear these glory stories, I guess, and would kind of wish I was back in that area. But these album covers, these Rick Griffin posters, just all this stuff that my dad had brought back really had an influence on my art development as far as line quality. And then later on, you learn about putting, from some of the, I came out here to the Institute of American Indian Arts and studied under some of the contemporary artists from the 80s at that time. And they showed you how to put content, meaning into your work as opposed to just having a graphic. So I've always tried to combine the influence from the automotive, motorcycle influence that my father had, but then also established with the native art that also has kind of just every bit of it has an underlying environmental message. Before that was popular, really. It's kind of always been there, and anyway, so I've tried to combine those influences. It wasn't very popular in Oklahoma, but as years go by, people have kind of caught on to it, and I'm just kind of, luckily I've been accepted as, oh, that's Danny, he's going to throw his psychedelia in no matter what. And and it keeps evolving, you know. I thought it was kind of an art form that was over by the time I had come of age, but I moved out here. I met people of all walks of life, and I just knew that it was going to keep resurging. And now there's other forms, bands in England, doom bands of all different types that have taken this art form, and it continues on. And so it's kind of still an underground thing, but I enjoy it. It's what influences my work the most. And I mean, just every bit of it. And then when you think you've seen it all, there's always something else that, oh wow, like this blue cheer poster over here, that's enough to charge my batteries and make me go back and start working tonight. So, you know, I grew up with those 45s, so that's wonderful.
It's great you mentioned linear, because your work is so linear, and then all of that work is so linear.
It's the line.
It's
work.
based on line.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And sign painting, and I was lucky enough to work in the sign painting industry before inkjet printing took that over. And so I was able to learn some of the tricks of the trade, let's say. So this piece here, though, my father was, we're all very much into Greek mythology and different stories. We're not experts on it by any means, but he had this wonderful Medusa tie pin with ruby eyes. I loved it. And so also I loved Archie's comics as well. So I had a crush on Veronica when I was 5 or 6 years old. So I combined them both together. And so this is my first kind of venture into three-dimensional work. But it's still, even though it's on steel, it's still just another surface to paint on. And hopefully we can make more of these and keep going.
The cartooning, I think, too, is kind of interesting in your work because it creates an opportunity for a narrative element.
Yes.
But cartooning was very important back in the 60s, and it's always been, you know, in papers and in many different, you know, aspects of media, but it really became prominent again in the 60s in a lot of the psychedelic work.
Zap Comics was a huge influence. Now, that was the stack of comics I wasn't allowed to get into. But comics were 25, 35 cents then. You could grab one, and I'd be quiet in the car while everybody was in the grocery store, and I wouldn't bug anybody. So over the years, I accumulated this obsessive collection with comics, and also with that relation with Oklahoma flat style native art, because it was very hieroglyphic and almost cartoon-like, similar to what was done in the Dorothy Dunn School here in the 30s and 40s. But also, I just found this connection. There's this thread that connected everything. And so I still, you know, your first influences are what's always going to be important. And like I say, I can always go back to this material and constantly find depth and worth in it.
Well, the other thing too is I think with the cartooning, you know, that's where a lot of pop emerged out of, the Ben Dot and, you know, Lichtenstein and what have you. So I think cartooning, when you talk about this return to psychedelia, I think the cartooning and pop had such an accessibility, which is why I don't think it's ever going to go away, you know, because it's a way to really message very easily and people kind of get it. Even if they don't get the underlying concept, the aesthetics of it is so accessible to people, you know, and so if they're really into figurative work, or even, you know, not, but just, you know, just like the color and you know, line and figuration. So I think it's kind of interesting that it's been an art form that's really kind of reemerged at that time. It was co-opted a lot in the psychedelic realm, but and then into pop art, and it seems to be pervasive and consistent, you know, throughout time. I mean, they're always, and it was kind of interesting too when you look at contemporary art, like in emerging markets like China and what have you. The first thing they do in Japan is cartooning. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't know if you've noticed it or not, but it seems like it's it always looks sort of like it's riffing on you know, pop art. But it's a way to make a political message or economic message, and so I think that's why it seems like it's, you know, you see that carry through. I don't know if you agree or not with that, but it just seems like, you know, cartooning seems to always have a resurgence of utility and interest with people and with artists.
Absolutely.
Were you a fan of Robert Crumb's comics?
Yes, I was. Well, that being a Hell's Angel, they have a little corner on the Cheap Thrills album that the Hell's Angels endorsed and improved this. And Dad used to see Janis Joplin play when she was a folk singer, kind of.
Right.
And it wasn't before the loud amplification. And so Zap, well, just about any of those old magazines, I just kept on to until they were like dried up leaves. And you'd always find little ads for Art Crumb, and I never really knew who the guy was until probably about when a little bit before the film came out, and I think that was in the late 80s. And I was like, oh, that's who this guy is. And then I found, kind of fell in love with his story, you know, and also I could relate to it. Growing up in Oklahoma, there's a lot of, it's one thing when you're children, but as you get older and you start to turn to adulthood, people would start just acting like their parents, and there's a lot of kind of rough redneck action going on growing up, and I realized that I didn't fit into that. And so I really related to Art Crumb's story, and then also him being another, just a wealth of information. Just when I think I've seen it all, there'll be a new publication printed out that I just love, you know. And so, but it's not something I'm going to let my kids see right yet, you know. Hopefully they'll discover it later on.
Yeah. You said you hope they don't.
Well, not right offhand. They're into their comics and their own characters that they like, you know. But yeah, a little older. Yeah.
Well, Crumb and that whole movement is sort of credited too with influencing Guston and his, you know, shift into figuration. Sure. So you can see a lot of that, and so it's kind of interesting that the influence was pretty broad in more areas than people give it credit for, which that was what I think is interesting about it art historically. It was at a very pivotal time, I think, for a lot of people, culturally, politically, socially, and so it was kind of interesting. I've
just recently discovered Justin's work, and I'm just, he's another one, he's a new one. And like I was saying, just when you think you've seen it all, here comes another individual that they picked it up from. There was a great show here with Robert Williams, and he's another influence. But how that came from was he used to work at Big Daddy Ross shop, and Dad's, oh, that's the guy that did the T-shirts. And so those influences were all there, and I have to, like I said, give it to my old man, because he just kind of put them all there in front of me. And I was just a kid there, listening to records and looking at covers, and that's how it started.
Mhm.
So Jennifer, do we have, are we going to do her piece? So actually, let me finish up with Danny, because when I met,
How did it come across you?
oh, that's right, Kate's wife. So we were introduced through somebody here in town, and I saw the work, and I went online, and I really, really liked it, and I was thinking about it for something we were doing in August, but then I knew I wanted to do this show. So I had gone to, he hung a lot of, I don't know how you would do this one, things for us where he works at II, and so I thought of this show immediately when I saw that work, so I told him, I said to him, I said, I hope you're not offended, but I said, I really think your work would also work great in this psychedelia show. And then he just told me the story he told you, and I thought, okay, well, he's not offended at all,
No.
but I just wasn't sure.
No, not at all. Actually, that's where I've been trying to aim for years.
There.
There you go. All right.
Okay. So the painting that Richard just hung is Jennifer Joseph's. It was, it's one that, I don't know, I guess I saw it about this summer sometime. Where were we? I guess the Collective.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize it was her work. I've seen these around, but I never put two and two together that it was Jennifer's. And so, and again, when I saw it, I thought, oh wow, this is sort of really, fits in with this whole theme, especially if you look at Tedeschi's painting or Rakuko Naito's down at the end of the corridor there. It has that same sort of flavor, but very different. And so what we'll do is let Jennifer talk about this particular piece and her process, which is very unique, and then also sort of your influences or what it is you like about sort of psychedelia or things that actually sort of fall in that realm.
Okay, I basically, my process is really kind of a deconstructive idea of, paintings are made up of individual brushstrokes, so just to have the surface of the painting be made up of individual brushstrokes that are obvious. So I had been practicing this process for, I don't know, probably 15 or 20 years, and this particular body of work is based on maps of your cornea that you get from the eye doctor. I have an eye problem that I have to get my corneas mapped all the time. So I get these printouts, and they're kind of like topographical maps in a way. And so that's how this form emerged. They're in bright colors, so that's why I made these paintings, and this is part of a series that relates to that, and it's called Eye Test. And so, because I get a lot of eye tests, but it also tests your eyes because of the color vibration and the color harmonies. They create a vibration in the back of your eye and the rods and the cones. So, it's an actual physiological effect that happens in your eye when you look at psychedelic work. And so it wasn't necessarily meant to refer to psychedelia, but what's going on with my eyes is that I see light in a different way, so there's always halos around the light, so I might as well be, having an experience. So these are very simply and painstakingly made. They're laid on, the brushstrokes are laid on individually in a continuous line, and then I have a deep love for color, so I enjoy using very bright colors as a way of kind of making your eye work. So,
Do you start at one point and work your way out?
Generally, I create a line somewhere in the middle of the plane, and then I'll start with that one, and then I'll work my way in, and then work my way out to the edges.
Interesting.
Yeah, so, I mean, it just makes sense to do it that way, because then otherwise you would get.
I was hoping there was a fast way of doing it.
No. They take weeks.
Painstaking.
They're painstaking, they're so
beautiful.
tedious.
It's worth it.
It's so painful to make sometimes, especially if you're in a hurry.
Yeah.
You can't hurry.
No.
So, but it does kind of, the process itself is, and I think, a lot of artistic processes are, you get into that zone of, being very present and very focused on making, the correct mark. And in this case, it's really very much about, zeroing in and focusing directly on just making the correct mark. And, so that it relates to the marks around it and next to it. And these don't always go so well. Sometimes it's very, I had to sand off a big one recently, and it was painful to do that because it didn't work
Yeah,
out.
a lot of time.
A lot of time, but also a lot of material.
Yeah, there's a lot of paint on them.
Yeah.
Because you sort of push the paint down so you get a flat stroke, and what it does is it squeezes it out
Mm-hmm.
from the side, so
Right.
it creates these little ridges, which is kind of interesting. She also works in monochrome, like there's an orange one in the back. And what's nice about these, that is they get the ridge, so you actually get a pattern,
Mm-hmm.
and you still see this flow or movement across the canvas,
Right.
but
But the
it's.
ridges create a pattern that also interact with how it's lit.
Mhm.
So the light becomes an element in the composition, and it changes in different lights. It changes depending on your point of view. So it's endlessly fascinating to me. It's like my
They're
obsession.
very active,
Thank
Yeah.
you.
yeah.
Yes. But it takes a certain amount of, sometimes it just takes me hours to settle down into making one of these paintings. Like, I'll be very easily distracted by mundane things like laundry or whatever. It's like, well, water the plants now. So that's, but then once I kind of settle into it, it takes on a rhythm of its own, and it's a very sort of nice, quiet time with myself, so it's enjoyable. But yeah, this is the last big painting like that I have done in a while.
Did you happen to see Max Cole's paintings that were at Charlotte Jackson's? They may be down.
No, I
They're
missed that
incredible.
one.
They're
Yeah.
really, I just brought them up because they're really about what you're talking about.
Uh-huh.
The meditative, obsessive meditative relaxation that eventually comes.
It does eventually come,
Yeah.
but sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
So that's when you like.
But Max's are also very neutralized palette.
Oh, definitely,
Yeah.
but I was just thinking about
Yeah.
the mantra.
Yeah, and the individual brush strokes and,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I mean, I a long time ago sort of limited my practice to, sort of this minimal process of just, laying down brush strokes one next to another. But the fact that color is a very complex structure,
Yeah.
I view it as a structure. I view it as like a three-dimensional.
The color in these is so physical. It's almost as if you're constructing space with the coloration,
Yeah.
which is really interesting.
Yeah, thank you.
It looks so much like, it seems so influenced by all the plastic products that came out in the 70s out of LA
Yeah.
after the military
Mhm.
stopped producing plastic products for the Vietnam War, then they brought them into the public. And so this has such a plastic, kind of brought forward quality to it. The coloration does, it's fantastic.
Well, I mean, the coloration is really derived from the actual, printouts that I
Which
get
is
at the eye
really
doctor.
interesting.
So it's like, let's just make these pop, and then, the whole idea that it is supposed to be an optical exercise.
Yeah.
Essentially, I don't always paint in a high key. A lot of my other work is more subtle.
How many coats do you have to use going around?
It's just one.
That's just
It's
one
a
coat?
single layer of paint.
Wow.
And I use oil paint that's hand ground.
Oh.
So it has large pigment particles, which is what makes it so vibrant.
Oh, it's oil-based.
Yeah, so, just mix the color and then make the line, and hope that I mixed enough for the length of the lines,
Yeah,
you know?
I do hope you mixed enough.
Yeah, sometimes that doesn't work out. You have to start over, and wipe it off. But generally speaking, you know, these are very sort of long processes, and you know, I need hours at a time to really spend with it. So, but yeah, it's called eye test.
Well, then there's the one that's greens and reds, and then silver leafed.
Right.
And so that was another process, or it's another body of work, as you referred to, that still has a little bit of an oppy feel to it just because of the patterning, but it's much, much more subtle because it's essentially monochromatic when it's silvered over. So it's just individual little silver leaf
Yeah.
and then brushed, and then sometimes it brushes through and you get a little bit of the nuance of color underneath it, which I think that really makes it very interesting.
The monochrome
history.
Yeah, the monochrome pieces that use this technique of patterning, that's when the light really becomes an integral element to the piece. So, you know, depending on the time of day or the kind of light in the room, it totally changes the piece. So, and especially with the reflective surface of the silver, that adds a whole other element to it. I kind of got obsessed with gilding for a while, and then so I gilded over some paintings that maybe weren't working so well, but the pattern was working, but the color wasn't. So I was like, well, let's put some silver leaf on it and see what happens, and it worked. So I did that for a while, and now I'm kind of even limiting it further and just doing stripes, color lines of color. So they're pretty severe, but they have a lot of different subtle gradations, and you know, I sort of love the endlessness of working with color. It's just endless. You can never make the same painting twice.
Even if you try.
And if I tried, I could probably be close, but I don't know if I was, so,
Do you have any questions about any of the pieces, or even any of the other work of the show? Everybody's pretty much looked at everything, so. Well, thank you very much. Did you guys have any comments, or?
Yeah, I'm very happy to be a part of this show, and thank you.
Yeah, like I said, I've been waiting for a psychedelic themed art show to come around for years. So thank you very much for.
It's finally aligned.
Finally. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that's cool.
Oh, that's right, we have to sign off. Well, for those of you in the cyber audience, thank you very much, and thanks everybody for coming, and we'll go ahead and stop this part of the talk right now and let people walk around and ask individual questions. So, thanks for coming.